There are political mistakes you can recover from, and then there are the moments that permanently change how people see you. Today I want to talk about Gordon Brown's time as Prime Minister from 2007 to 2010, and a simple question that still hangs over that period. Which single episode did the most damage to him? Because when Brown arrived in number 10, he didn't arrive as an unknown. He'd been Chancellor for a decade. He had a reputation. Serious, cautious, competent, and intensely focused on the numbers. The expectation was that he would bring stability after the Blair years. And yet, within months, a particular story took hold about who he was as a leader. Once that story set, it proved incredibly difficult to shake. Usually, 3 early blows are put at the center of this debate. First, the attempt to extend pre-charge detention for terror suspects from 28 days to 42. Second, the 10p tax rate fiasco, where low-income workers ended up worse off, and the government had to scramble to fix it. And third, the non-election of autumn 2007, the election everyone thought he would call, and then he didn't. Let's take them one at a time, because all 3 hurt. The key is understanding why one of them went beyond normal damage and started to define Brown personally. Start with a 42-day detention proposal. In 2008, Brown argued this was about public safety, not politics. The government pushed hard to extend the amount of time terror suspects could be held before being charged. It wasn't an easy win. It scraped through the Commons by a tiny margin, just 9 votes, and then it was defeated in the House of Lords anyway. Politically, the costs were real. It alarmed civil libertarians, reinforced fears that labor had drifted toward an authoritarian instinct, and it required very visible arm twisting to even get that narrow Commons result. But here's the thing. Even critics could see it as part of a wider post-9/11 security agenda that had been building for years. Controversial, yes, but it didn't stamp Brown with a new identity. It didn't become the single defining symbol of his leadership. Now, the 10p tax rate debacle, also around 2008, this one cut closer to Labor's own sense of itself. Brown had once introduced a 10p starting rate as Chancellor, and then, as Prime Minister, his government abolished it in the name of simplifying tax bands. On paper, it sounded like tidying up. In reality, it left millions of low-income workers worse off. That's the kind of mistake that doesn't just trigger bad headlines. It triggers moral anger from your own side. Labor MPs threatened rebellion, and the government ended up backtracking with compensation and partial fixes. Brown took responsibility publicly, but the reputational hit was obvious. He looked out of touch with the distributional impact of his own policy, and that clashed directly with Labor's redistributive identity. And yet, even this didn't fully settle into a permanent definition. It badly weakened his standing inside the party, but it didn't close every door. In fact, not long after, the global financial crisis arrived, and for a period it reframed him. Internationally, he looked experienced and serious. For a moment, that old image of economic competence seemed to return. Which brings us to the autumn of 2007, and what many people remember as the election that never happened. This is a strange one, because there was no bill, no vote, no legislation. There wasn't even a campaign, not officially. And yet it left a deeper scar than policies that actually went through Parliament. Here's what happened. Brown replaces Tony Blair in June 2007, and initially Labor has momentum. The polls look good. The Conservatives under David Cameron are still defining themselves. Suddenly, Westminster starts buzzing with a single idea. Brown might call a snap election. Briefings swirl. The campaign machine stirs. Expectations rise not just among journalists, but among MPs, donors, activists, and voters who can sense when politics is moving in a particular direction. And then Brown pulls back. He decides not to seek an immediate mandate. He makes the announcement, carefully worded, essentially saying he's considered it and concluded the time isn't right. In normal life, deciding not to do something is often invisible. In politics, once you've signaled that you might act, not acting becomes the action. It's the moment that people interpret. And Cameron understood instantly what the story could be. The Conservatives labeled Brown with a nickname that did real work, Bottler Brown. The suggestion was simple and brutal. He flinched. Why did that matter more than a flawed tax change or a contentious security proposal? because it didn't revolve around one policy area. It went straight to leadership character. It told a story about decision-making, nerve, and authority. This is the key point. Politics runs on perception of authority. Brown's authority as prime minister was still new, still forming, and this punctured it. From that point on, a narrative hardened. When he moved quickly, it looked like he was reacting. When he moved slowly, it looked like he was dithering. Either way, the frame was set, and the contrast mattered. Cameron, by simply standing there and calling him out, got to look confident. He got to look like the person pushing forward while Brown hesitated. Even among people who didn't love Cameron's politics, the optics were powerful. This is why historians and political analysts, including Anthony Seldon in his work on Brown, often land on the same verdict. The aborted 2007 election did the most damage, not because it changed the law, not because it transformed policy, but because it changed what people thought they knew about Brown. Now, it's important to be fair. In 2008, when the financial crash hit, Brown did have a period where his experience and seriousness counted for something. On the world stage, he was involved in coordinating responses and looked like a grown-up in a crisis. That lift was real, and you can argue it temporarily restored some stature. But domestically, the earlier story never fully went away. Once indecisive becomes a label, every event gets interpreted through it. Every pause becomes caution. Every adjustment becomes weakness. And in British politics, that kind of branding can be fatal, because it affects not just voters, but also your own MPs, your own party discipline, and the confidence of allies who start asking themselves whether you can win. So if you're asking which episode broke Brown, it's tempting to point to the most dramatic policy controversy, or the moment the party turned on itself. But the argument that holds up best is quieter and, in a way, harsher. It was the moment nothing happened. The election that wasn't called ended up defining the government that followed. And that leaves a final question worth sitting with. If Brown had gone for it in 2007, even if he'd only won narrowly, would he have looked different? Would events have been interpreted differently? Or was the hesitation itself a glimpse of deeper instincts that were always going to shape his premiership? That's all for today. Next time you see a political leader hesitate, watch what happens next. Because sometimes the decision you don't take is the one that follows you the longest.